greatest foreign policy success in the Middle East in the last half-century was probably weaning Egypt away from the Soviet Union and bringing it into the pro-American camp. The current turmoil in Egypt now creates the possibility of the greatest catastrophe in U.S. Middle East policy of the last half-century, as there is a distinct possibility that the new leadership that may emerge from this unrest in Egypt will be unsympathetic to the United States and extremely hostile toward our interests throughout the Middle East. Hosni Mubarak has announced that he plans to eventually step down, but we have no idea who is going to take his place. The potential for a radical Islamist takeover, unfortunately, is very great. The Mubarak regime had been repressing the Muslim Brotherhood, and while we don't like the idea of repression, we also have to recognize that the Muslim Brotherhood is a radical Islamic group that has long been trying to take over Egypt and has a ideology that is anti-American, anti-West, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic. They also pose a very serious threat to the Egyptian people and to the broader Middle East. First to the Egyptian people by the threat of imposing the kind of Islamic regime that has essentially enslaved the people in Iran, also by promoting terrorism throughout the Middle East and potentially beyond, and by becoming now an ally of the Iran axis, including the Syrians and the Lebanese. Over the last decades, we've provided billions of dollars in military aid to Egypt despite them having no external threats. In 2010 alone, we provided $1.3 billion in military aid. During the same period, we've neglected the needs of the Egyptian people as their population has exploded, as they've needed more food, medicine, employment opportunities. We've provided just last year a paltry $250 million in economic aid. And by failing to meet the needs of the people, we now are seeing how serious they have been suffering and how they've blamed their own government and indirectly the United States for not meeting their needs. We now have a chance to correct our mistakes by redirecting our economic aid program so that we give minimal amounts of military assistance and maximal amounts of economic aid to help the people of Egypt build up their economy, reform their government, and create a condition in which they feel that their lives can be better with both a new government and with a stronger economy. Under the Mubarak regime, Egypt has been a bulwark against terrorism in many parts of the region and been an ally in the war against terror. However, if a new regime comes to power, especially one associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, it's possible that the largest Arab country with the largest army supplied by American weapons could now be a major source of terror and could become one of the greatest threats to American interests throughout the region. Therefore, it's especially important that the United States carefully calibrate its response to the current unrest and make sure that in its desire to see freedom and democracy reign, it doesn't make the same mistake that it did in the Palestinian Authority by forcing elections that brought to power the radical Hamas, which undermined much of the peace efforts and stability that the United States hoped to create between Israel and the Palestinians. As it stands, if Egypt does fall to a anti-American regime, the United States will have only three real friends in the Middle East: the Israelis, the Jordanians, and the Gulf states. And now we see growing unrest in Jordan, where the majority of the population is Palestinian, where there is long-time disaffection for the Hashemite regime there, and there is a distinct possibility that Jordan could be the next domino to fall. All of this unrest has serious implications for the State of Israel, which has been working to negotiate a peace agreement with the Palestinians. Now, with the potential threat of Egypt emerging on its southern border, combined with the growing threat from Hezbollah having taken over Lebanon in the north and the continuing belligerency of Syria along the north, it makes it extremely difficult for Israel to consider any additional territorial compromises to be surrounded with enemies as it was prior to 1967. And in those circumstances, it's hard to see how Israel will be able to pursue a peace agreement with the Palestinians, which would allow them to be completely encircled by potential enemies.